Um, I'm a lawyer by my background, so I studied law in Russia, and then since I worked already then with indigenous peoples and the implementation of their rights, I thought it's not enough only to have the knowledge of law, and then I took the master program in indigenous studies in Tromsø, where it was multidisciplinary program with different aspects like social sciences, methodologies, histories, also rights, languages. And currently I am a PhD student in Sámi studies, which is the position is affiliated to the language department, but basically the Sámi studies is also a multidimensional program. So my focus is on the language rights and implementation of the rights in the social context. I'm associate editor in Arctic Review on Law and Politics, and as I said, I'm working with the indigenous people's rights and with the implementation of mostly I'm working with cultural rights, human rights, and I'm not focusing that much on the such rights as, for example, land rights of indigenous peoples in Russia. So it's part of my PhD research that I'm presenting now. So I thought maybe it's good if you know where I am. So I started in 2016 and I had 2 parental leaves. So now I'm planning to work for 1.5 year more with 50% until I'm done with my PhD. The PhD is planned to be in a form of a kappa, so there will be some publications included. I have some papers already published. The journal articles, they are mostly focused on the language rights and on the legal aspects. And then I also have book chapters. One is published and one is accepted for the publication, where basically it's contextual chapters that I'm presenting the information about the situation, current situation with the language teaching, Sámi language teaching in Russia. And I'm planning to write at least 2 more materials, or to develop 2 directions. The first one is law in books, to write 1 more material on the legal regulation of the right of indigenous children to learn their language at school. And then the other one is my analysis that I will also present here of the interviews that I conducted during my field trips to Russia. And potentially there's also 1 more direction that I'm very interested to work with, and that's why I'm here now, is theoretical paper on the interconnection of the law in books and the social practice and when it comes to the law enforcement in the Russian context. So yeah, so there are some things that I still want to do before the defense, so that my my doctoral thesis is complete. So what is the background? So in the Russian Federation, we do have indigenous peoples. 47 of them are recognized. It's a bit complex issue because the Russian definition of indigenous peoples differs from the international legal definition, since in Russia we do have numerical criterion, which means that only the group of people less than 50,000 persons can be recognized as indigenous, in addition to other criteria of indigenous people to be recognized inter alia, for example, self-identification. So in Russia, for example, we have Nenets people who are a bit less than 50,000 and they are recognized as indigenous peoples. But the question is, okay, what will happen if after the next population census, we will have the situation that they are constituting, for example, 51,000 of persons? Do they then lose the indigenous status? So yeah, I think that this numerical criterion, it complicates the situation. But then, of course, the very high number of indigenous communities in Russia created the situation that some groups, they got excluded. So when it comes to Sámi, the Sámi people, they are people living in 4 countries in the Sápmi area. And this is Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Russia. And in the Russian Federation, according to the data of 2010, we have less than 2,000 Sámi persons living in Russia. And then we're waiting now for the results of the population census that happened not long time ago, a year ago, but the data is still not published on the amount of Sámi people living in Russia. And it also that we have to understand that the data of the population census, it does not really reflect the reality, because basically any person could say and identify himself as Sámi person, and then this number would be in official statistics. So most of the Russian Sámi population lives in the territory of Kula Peninsula. It's in the Murmansk Oblast. So 1,600 persons are living there. And originally there were 4 Sámi languages that were spoken in this area. So basically, this is the area that we are talking about when it comes to Russia. And then this is the whole Sápmi area, and here you can see the current borders of the states that they didn't exist before, and that's why we call the area Sápmi. So, and here is Murmansk, that is the capital of the region, Murmansk region, and here's the area where I conducted most of my field work, but I also was in Murmansk, since I also interviewed officials. But the only school where the Sámi language is taught is located here. And I'm talking about the school context. So the only school where this school subject, Sámi language, is in Lovozero. So what are the challenges? So we have the situation when we have very little amount of Sámi people living in Russia, less than 100 persons, according to some estimations and research. They are speaking the Sámi language, one of 4 Sámi languages that is traditional in the territory of the Russian area of Sápmi. And then we have the situation that the language is not an obligatory subject at school. People are not, the kids, they are not getting the Sámi language training after the 5th grade. So basically we can see that the language knowledge exists basically at the around the population that is older than 50 years. So in my study, being a lawyer, and I contacted indigenous communities, what we found out that basically they are not aware about the situation with their rights, with their language rights. And I thought that my contribution could be actually the education, the legal education about their rights. And also for me, it was very interesting to see how the social reality in the Sámi community differs from the legal order that we have, like the law in books that we have. And I wanted to see if there's any gap between the real situation in the Sámi community and law. If we have this gap, can we change the legislation? Can we affect it in a way that the legal norms, they do reflect the needs of the Sámi community? So that's what I started from, and my current objective, since it's changing often, is to analyze how the right to learn their own language by the Sámi children at school in Russia is enforced in Lovozero village at school. So as I said, I have the legal perspective. I want to understand myself what the right to learn the indigenous language means, both based on the analysis of international law and the Russian legal norms. And also I want to discover the school context where this law works, or where other laws work, not the legal regulations are working. So that's what I'm doing in my research. I wanted to show you a bit the structure of my research and the ideas that I had when I designed the research. So basically, I analyze, as I said, law in books. I analyze both international legal regulations when it comes to the right in focus and the national legislation at the level of the federal legislation and regional legislation. And then I look at law in action, how it's effectuated. The problem with law in action is that we do not have the court practice when it comes to the cultural rights of indigenous peoples, particularly the language rights. And then I'm analyzing lived law, and I want to find out what are the people's interests, how do people see the right that I'm analyzing, what are the real needs of the Sámi community. And I'm employing different methods. So for example, when it comes to law in books, it's legal method. When it comes to law in action, it's mix of legal methodology, but also interviews. And in this stage, I conducted interviews and observations. So as I said, these are the main methods I'm using, but one also have to take into consideration that I have very specific field of the study, and I cannot only analyze, I cannot only use the methodology that I selected. I also have to take into account that the ethical considerations, they are very important in this specific context. So of course, I applied to the ethical board to conduct my research, but it's not really about this, because basically as a Swedish ethical board identified, my research is not within the competence of this board. So basically on me, it was a lot of responsibility on trying to conduct the ethical research, which means that before I started to design my project, I met the indigenous communities and I discussed with them how they see it, how they want it to be done. And then we discussed with them the stages of the research process regarding what I could do for the community itself. we discussed about the potential public presentations that of my research for them. We also discussed that I could create the guidelines, the legal guidelines regarding the regulations, the rights that they have. We discussed with them the potential cooperation with developing the school curricula. And now, since it's very problematic political situation, it's also that some ideas that we had together on cooperation, they're not possible to implement because I'm being a representative of Swedish Research Institute. I cannot work with organizations in Russia. So this and it also, this situation impacts my research that I actually wanted to go for the field trip to discuss with indigenous communities the data that I have. And it's impossible for me now to go in person there because it's, yeah, it's completely different situation when you discuss with them already sensitive topic in person, or when you just communicate via emails. They can just ignore you. So there are quite some challenges in addition to those ones that I did not mention, but if you have time, we can discuss it more. So based on the results of my analysis, legal analysis of the sources of international and national legislation that I defined as the core legal materials for regulating the right in focus, I identified 5 core elements of the right of indigenous children to learn their language at school. And my idea that all these elements, they are interconnected. So they basically create one legal framework of the right. So the first element is that the right itself has to be recognized by the state. And the indigenous children, they have to have a right to use their language at every aspect of educational process. Then there's very important aspect of non-discrimination aspect of the right. And then mostly based on the Article 27 of ICCPR, we can claim that a very important component of the right in focus is enjoyment of indigenous culture, as well as religion and also histories. And then I also claim that active participation of indigenous communities and, if possible, indigenous children in all stages of educational process is very important. Also, when it comes to the planning, participation in planning and implementation of the educational programs. And then receiving appropriate and high quality education as one of the aspects of the right based on the legal analysis. And then here it's just the information about the legal acts that I analyzed, and we can maybe skip it for now. So after analyzing the legal regulations, I moved to the next step where I went to the community again and talked to them about the elements of the right. But before I'm explaining you my interviews part, I would like to tell you a little bit about the situation as it is in Russia with the Sámi language teaching. So the only school, as I already briefly mentioned when demonstrating the map, the only school in Russia where children can learn the Sámi language is the Lovozero school. Only one language is represented there. It's Kildin Sámi in the school context. The educational activity within which the children are getting the knowledge of the Sámi language is not obligatory. The language is taught 45 minutes a week. There are sometimes mixed classes, which means that pupils of second and third grade can study together. The classes take place on Friday evenings, and children of both Sámi and non-Sámi can join the classes. Yeah. Also, one of the very important aspects is the Sámi teacher training program in Russia. We do have 2 universities where the Sámi teachers are trained. It's one university is located in the area of Murmansk region, and the other one is in St. Petersburg. And this is the Lovozero school, so where I went. It's municipal school, so it's financed by the state. It's has regular Russian school curricula. Yeah. And also there are some other institutions where there's a Sámi language that is passed to the children and to the people of all the generations. It's National Cultural Center, and these are the photos from the daycare, from the kindergarten, from the Sámi language class. So what was done by me is for different periods. I went 2 times to Lovozero and to Murmansk in person. The first trip, as I said, was I started my PhD in the end of August 2016, and then in January I already went there before I did the proper design planning, and because I wanted to meet communities to discuss with them their planning, their ideas, their needs for the research, and also I wanted to discuss with them how I could help them, like with my research, and how the things would be coordinated. I wanted to tell them about my future planning when I'm going to come again to the community. So, and then in 2019, I again went to the field trip, and while the first trip was more that I was exploring the situation, I was meeting a lot of people who are engaged in the issue, but they are not particularly working with the school context. The second field trip, it was more focused on the people that I'm working with, and on the interviews with specific persons. You can see in my table I wrote whom I met. There are no names of the persons. And also this is one of the ethical considerations that was very important to follow, that despite the fact we have only one school in Russia, it's I did my best to anonymize the persons I worked with. And then there was a plan that in 2020 I will go again to do my third field trip. I wanted to go to the higher educational institutions where the Sámi language teacher training is exercised. And also I wanted to go to Murmansk region, where I could participate in a conference regarding establishing the teacher training program in Murmansk region and go into the community. And it never happened because of the pandemics. And then I was planning to go now, and this probably will also not happen. So I interviewed some people via Zoom, and of course it's completely different situation, completely different data I'm getting from them, but that's probably all I will have for for the data, for the analysis, for at least for my PhD. And I hope that it will be possible for me to conduct research in future, because I personally see that the situation with language, it's changing every day. As I said, those ones who speak the language and who have the competence in the language, they are people representing all the generations. So it's there's need for supporting the community with the language rights, but I don't know if it will be possible for me to travel in the nearest future, because what I see for myself, the most important work that can be done is actually work with the community itself. It was my long way from being a lawyer to the person who is here now. But working with the communities, I also worked with Nenets community. I realized that the legal norms, they are not decisive in a way when it comes to the social reality. The shape of the right and the embodiment of the right itself, it's finalized in the social context. So having the 5 elements of the right that I defined based on the results of the legal analysis and the interviews that I designed also thematically when I wanted to analyze the social practice in relation to this right, showed me that the social context itself in the Sámi community is the decisive one when it comes to the creating the full picture of the right. So summing up, I came to the sociology of law because the different social realities that I could feel and I could see conducting interviews, yeah, they demonstrated that the contextualization of the right is in the field, in the real life of the people, and therefore, in addition to these legal elements that I defined, it's very important to take into consideration the social context. And I'm not presenting you what I really found out while conducting the field work, because it would have taken a lot of time. But if you have questions, if you want to know more about what kind of social realities that are affecting the real situation with enforcement of the right, of course, you're free to ask about it, because as I said, I already conducted the field works, and the information is there. It's just not placed into the presentation that I did not want to be too long. So that's all I wanted to tell in my presentation, and yeah.
Do you want to take a quick coffee break?
As you wish. I also have a cookie. Hmm?
So I guess it's questions.
Mm.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot. This is a very interesting project. I'm glad you are here to talk about it and tell us about it. So, I can't believe all the hardships you had in conducting the research with the pandemics and the war and everything. So it's very impressive. But like, my question is actually the question you posed yourself about what is the result, what is the social reality that is impacting.
So and that's the job that I'm doing now, the analysis of interviews, finding the patterns basically in the people's in the people's explanations of the situation. So basically what I can see that there are different perspectives, and of course the perspective of official really differs from practitioners, and it differs from receivers. When it comes to the official position, it's mostly, if we tell it very simple, that the Murmansk region, it has responsibility on teaching the Sámi language, and in some cases for the school principal and for the authorities, it's this responsibility is taken very formally. And sometimes the school administration is challenged with with convincing the receivers to have this subject at school. So even though if we are saying, okay, there's the right, and it's very important to implement this right, in the reality we see the situation that the interests they are different, that the children, they are not always having the desire to have the language within the school context, because and in this situation the administration, the enforcers, they're having this approach that they have to fulfill this obligation, while for example, when we talk about the receivers, they are saying, okay, if we learn the language, what is the future perspective that we have? Where do we go to work? Are we going to stay again, like in Russia? For example, we can see the trend that children, they want to learn the North Sámi, the language that is not common for the area, but because they can move to Norway, they want to learn it. So they, for example, they are saying, okay, we could continue our education in Norway, or we could get a job after that there. And also, it's a very complex issue, but the educational system as well, itself is not designed for extra subjects that are not included into examination. So the children, they're very pressed that they have to perform in the exams, and therefore they're saying, okay, then we want to focus on Russian and on the foreign language, which is English, and then later, for example, German. We have the Sámi community being a very small community, and the members of the communities, they are having different roles. So, for example, being a teacher, you easily can also be a parent, or being it's just an example. For example, you can be activist, but you can also be an official. In this case, the situation that it's a very small community, very interconnected, it creates the situation that there are a lot of tensions between the members. And these tensions, they lead to the situation that the development of the rights implementation was for quite some time stopped by these conflicts. And these conflicts, it doesn't really mean that the discussions within the community, they are really they are not solvable in a way, but since people have their own interests, and they spend a lot of energy on the discussion. So for example, when we talk about practitioners, and it's also only one of the aspects of the problem, the teachers, they are saying, okay, if I went for the teacher training, but instead of being trained, I was criticized by some other people that I'm teaching the language wrong, that I have a wrong approach because of these tensions. So there are a lot of things that need to be systemized from my side, but these are just some of the trends that I can see, and that are not really dependent on those legal norms that I described.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, this I guess it's as you say, very complex reasons. But I was also thinking about. So I don't know the Sámi's history in Russian, but I know a bit from Norway, and I was wondering if we can also this can also be explained based on a colonial history. For example, in Norway, the Sámi population was tried Norwegified kind of, and many lost their language, and parents didn't want to teach their children the language because it was so shameful. It was a shame to speak Sámi language. You weren't supposed to do it. So it's kind of first with this newer generation today where they have taken back kind of a pride in Sámi culture and Sámi language and so on. But it was very shameful for a very long time.
I mean, of course, we also have the period of the time when in this village, in the time of Russification, you call it Norwegianization in Norway, and in Russia you call it with a focus on the Russian language. There were two schools. So one school was the boarding school for the Sámi, mostly for Sámi children, but basically for those kids whose parents, for example, were reindeer herders. They were placed for quite some time to live in this boarding school and study, and there was municipal school. Now we only have one municipal school because they were merged. There was no need anymore for the boarding school. So there was period in the history that when the pupils, they were coming with their mother tongue Sámi, and they were forced to learn a foreign language, Russian. At that time, it was foreign to them. And they were punished for not progressing good enough. And of course, we still have people who remember this. So of course, there are lost generations, and I think that of course it is having an impact. There's no doubt about it. But this is your and my discussion. What was important for me in the interviews is to analyze the perspective of people on how they see it. And this perspective, the Soviet heritage, it was discussed only by one person who said that, yeah, we have this history of colonization, and we lost a lot of Sámi intelligence, and that's why we have problems now with the teaching materials. We have problems with the books. We have problems with as they call it, normativity of the language. So yes, there's such a perspective, but what I could feel that this, like the social factor that really is there in the words of all persons, independently from their group that I identified, is this issue of the internal conflicts in the Sámi community now, when you don't have official statement that you're not allowed to use the Sámi, but still, because of the tensions we experienced with the situation, that the progress with teaching is not happening, and therefore the language revitalization is not progressing as good as it could progress. So I do believe it's the past really impacted the situation now, it's no doubt. But as I said in the interviews, it was only one person who really talked about it, being so deeply concerned.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering, like, in a broader picture of the situation for human rights in Russia in general, the negative trend of many groups have seen their rights being withdrawn, both in law, as I understand it, but also in practice. Is there a risk that the right for indigenous peoples will also, do they worry about that? And does that affect?
So I'm analyzing this issue partly in the dissertation, but I'm also working with Arctic Review on Law and Politics. I'm very engaged into these issues, especially now, and definitely the human rights of indigenous people are very much affected by the situation in Ukraine, because the war, if we're talking, for example, only about the context of the war, but of course there's history of before the war regarding the indigenous people's rights. The war escalated this conflict, and this situation when the vulnerable ones, they're even more vulnerable. So, for example, we have the situation that the proportion of those ones who are indigenous and who are going to the war, it's much higher than the proportion of Russians going to the war, which demonstrates that there's lack of information about the situation in Ukraine. And also those ones who are going to the war, they're getting more money than unemployed indigenous representatives being at home. And also it's considered that, for example, for the Russian state authorities, it's better in a way to take now to the war those ones who are from periphery and from the villages, compared to those ones who are living in St. Petersburg and Moscow, because this compliance issue is, of course, more topical for the peripheries. So this is one of the problems. The other problem is, of course, the Russian communities, and especially the Sámi populations. As I said, they are very much connected. They were very much connected for a very long time with the Sámi populations of 3 other countries that were very much interested in supporting Russian Sámi communities. So there were a lot of projects on the language revitalization, financed by the Norwegian Research Council, by the Barents Secretariat, by the Sámi Council. And all these cooperations, they are paused. So we don't know what will be the future, because for the indigenous organizations and the state authorities in European countries now, it's very hard to decide with whom to cooperate. There are some indigenous communities who really desire for the support, and some indigenous representatives, they moved now to Europe because they, from the beginning of the war, or even before, but there are some indigenous communities that are supporting the official position. So it's a very big dilemma now for the councils to decide who should be supported, and also the Arctic Council, who actually was who did a lot for supporting indigenous people's rights in general, and making indigenous voices heard, especially considering the colonial past. So in Arctic Council, together with the Arctic state, there are some indigenous organizations, including the Russian one, the biggest one, RIPEN, they had quite some voice that they could raise, but now all the meetings of Arctic Council, they are paused, and the decision was taken by all Arctic states and not indigenous organizations, except for Russia, which means that, of course, being an international arena and supporting the indigenous peoples, the Arctic Council now is not as active as it was before. when it comes to the indigenous communities in Russia, I think that it's not that easy for especially those ones I'm working with to discuss this topic, because already before the war, people were suspicious. Why I'm being Russian, work for the university in Europe? Why do I come there? Why do I want to get information from them? They were getting calls after me visiting them from the authorities. Okay, who was it? Like, what kind of information did you share? So I don't touch upon this topic with them because it's a very sensitive issue. What I know that at least the indigenous, the Sámi representatives in Russia who worked on this master program in Murmansk. This is the first year they started this program. They found resources inside the country to run this program, because originally the idea was that Finland and Norway should help with the teachers from Finland, and Norway should help. So the Sámi community itself trying to solve the problems and being proactive. But I think especially in the context, in my research context, there was a lot of support from outside on the development, on the language, cultural rights, and various rights. As I said, I'm not working with the extractive industries and land issues, but of course this is a very big thing, because Russia is the country where a huge amount of natural resources located, but as well on these areas a lot of indigenous peoples are located. So these conflicts, they were going for a very long time. The discussions were also raised in the United Nations that extractive companies, they're just taking the land from indigenous communities, for example in Kuzbas, and then they communities either don't get compensation, or if they get compensation, it's absolutely not compensating real loss that they have. So of course this will get escalated, and we can see these tendencies. But I don't know how far I will go exactly in the context of my dissertation into this issue. But as I said, I'm working on this topic, and at least in the journal that I'm editing. I have very long answers, so I'm very sorry, because it's very, it's a topic that is also in my heart now, because I'm also half Ukrainian and half Russian. So if I'm talking too long, you should stop me, because there are some topics that I'm too engaged.
No, absolutely not. It's very interesting, and it's such a great project. Thank you so much. I was wondering, could you go back to the map? I had a bit of a geographical question, because so am I right in thinking, you know, the M, how do you say the M place? Sorry, the map.
So it's Murmansk and Lovozero. Is it that what we're talking about?
Yes, exactly. And so I was, because did you mention Mamunsk? I'm sorry for that was like the capital of like is that, did I get that right?
Yes.
And so I was wondering how far away it was from
Moscow.
No, Lovozero.
Lovozero, Murmansk.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly, but it's just, I think it was 2 hours drive by car for me. It's not that far. So basically, I was the first time I flew to Murmansk, and then in the same night, I traveled to Lovozero, where I was living with indigenous activists, and I think it was 2 hours trip. But then it was the second time I came with my kid, and then we stayed in Murmansk. So I commuted every day, and it was no problem. So it's they are close to the.
Oh, but I was wondering if that's where most of the Samis live in. I'm so sorry.
Region.
Yeah. Would that, and if we look at the statistics, which would be, I'm not too sure. I just decided around a third of the statistics would be children. So maybe like, let's say 300 children are eligible for the school. This is a very rough estimate, but the school seems quite little. So it can't and it doesn't seem to be, if it's 2 hours away geographically, how many children can actually attend this school in the first place was my first thought. And then I thought, did you also, because if you're looking at law in books and law in action, did you also ask schools why they didn't I'm sorry, my vision isn't good enough for me to see this place. In Murmansk, why they don't have a school there to be able to teach.
In Murmansk?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's very relevant question because I also, and you don't need to apologize, because when I first started with my project, I was, when you read, it's one thing, but when you come to the area and you wonder why it's not the way as you think. So in fact, even though if it might feel that one school is not enough, I personally thought that there are some other. In Russia, it's also a thing that there were a lot of relocations due to the changes in the Soviet Union with industrialization of the north. So there's still some areas in the Murmansk region where Sámi people also live. So I wondered not only about Murmansk, but about other villages where the Sámi language could potentially be taught, but it's not taught. But I don't want to speculate. There are no other villages, and at least from the persons I talked to and I asked them what they also say, that if there's need, we will have this subject. If there's no need, we're not going to force anyone. Considering that Lovozero is considered to be the center, but Sámi, they are not the majority. It's just the most represented area by the Sámi. They have this school there. But as I said, it's also the number of those ones who are enrolled to the Sámi language class differs from those ones who are attending the class. So even in Lovozero, where we have this school, on Friday evenings, it's often that the class is cancelled. And it's not only because of the teacher is sick, but basically the kids are not attending. When it comes to the Murmansk city, we don't have the Sámi school, and also the answer that I've heard, because I cannot make the speculations why we can have like different aspects, economic and different and other ones. But I was said that if there's a need, we will open Sámi language classes, which means that basically the authorities say that there's no such need. I met some indigenous activists that are giving Sámi language classes in the school, but it's not official. So they basically come and teach, and it's not on a regular basis. So so there's only one school, and from the perspective, at least of those ones I talked to, there's capacity to create more classes, but there's no need expressed by the receivers. But I think that it's one perspective of from the Sámi community. I did not see either the information that we need to open more Sámi language classes. In Lovozero, as I said, there are practices where the language is taught in the private setting, in the after school, in the kindergarten, in the educational institution that is like cultural center. So I did not experience that people say, we need more settings for the Sámi language classes. And there's no official statistics on the amount of those ones. I also tried to find out how many kids are eligible. But there's no official statistics, because also we have to take into account that we have the Federal Statistics Service that is conducting the population census, and then we base the number of the Sámi on the data. So, for example, if I'm telling I'm Sámi, my number, like I will be placed into these statistics, but it doesn't mean that I am Sámi. We also have the list of the Sámi persons in Russia, which is completely different thing, and it's based on the legal documents, but it's not reflecting the real number of the Sámis, and it's mostly focused on getting hunting tickets and so on and so forth. And in educational, the Ministry of Education, there's no data on the amount of Sámi children, because we also, as I said, in Lovozero, non-Sámi are also allowed to study Sámi. So it basically does not really make that much sense for them to have the statistics only on Sámi. We also have the kids who, but this is a very complex issue. We also have in Lovozero mixed families where kids, they write, for example, okay, it's Nenets person, but his father is Nenets and mother is Sámi, or mother is but the parents perhaps want the child to learn the Sámi, even though if they don't identify the child as Sámi. So I don't know if I answered your question. So it's very complex, and it's only one school for now, and we don't know if there's need for more.
Thank you. Yeah, I have many questions.
Yeah,
It's really interesting, but I will just reduce them into two questions.
because I answered alone.
And one of them is about the formulation of the rights. Actually, you mentioned about the legal text, that it starts with the recognition by the state. So the right is actually reduced into the recognition by the state. Then it's about non-discrimination and so on. And actually what we are talking about in here is not the right to education in mother tongue, but right to learning one indigenous language. So I was wondering about the formulation of, let's say, the parents regarding rights. How do they, what is their motivation in making their children to learn the language if it's not referring to such colonial relationality thing that it's a dying language, so I want my children to learn the language and so on. And the second one is about the categorization of indigenous languages. It is also quite contested in the literature. You probably know better than me, right? It's like some languages, as long as they are categorized as indigenous languages, it is localized, it is culturalized. So it's not the language of the diplomacy, it's not the language of bureaucracy. So it's not that serious, but it can be taught. So it's like culturalized somehow. This is also like an ongoing discussion in France about the local languages. When they made Basque language as one of the local languages, it's quite a similar situation, so that the Basques can learn the language. But then there is a really increasing reaction towards that, saying that this actually localized language. So we don't want it to be recognized as a local language. We want it to be recognized as a language, so that it can be like as long language as French. If so, are there any discussions about this in this field? Thank you.
So first of all, I will make clarification on the legal recognition of the rights. So first of all, it's these elements, they're based on my analysis of the legal norms, and it's not that it's formal approach that the right should be recognized, and in this case it will be implemented. But of course, I was going from my starting position was that, okay, if we are talking about this right should be recognized, and this is clearly stated in the framework legal documents. So that's why I have this element. And then of course, when I'm clarifying what exactly should be recognized and what are the elements, I think that I'm getting more specific. So the second thing is about the right to learn language at school. And in this case, this formulation is based on the analysis of both international legal norms and the Russian legislation, because we have different opportunities presented by the Russian legislation to the indigenous language teaching. So the educational program can be based on the indigenous language. So de jure, you can have the language of instruction, indigenous language. De facto, we don't have any language out of the languages of indigenous communities in Russia that is used as a language of instruction in the program at school. So in fact, we have the situation that the language is taught as a school subject. And that's why I call this right as it is, because that's the reality that we have. The other question is that there are some languages of indigenous peoples in Russia that are taught as obligatory subject. In Russia, it's Nenets people, for example. And Sámi, in the Sámi context, it's non-obligatory subject, but I didn't reflect it in the right because it's the discussion that I come to when I explain the situation. Then the issue of the parents' motivations to learn the language, right? So there are different ideas that parents have, and I think that it very much depends from the role of the parent in the community. There are parents who have other roles that, for example, they are actively engaged with the Sámi language revitalization, language teaching, and in this case, these parents, I could see that they're saying, yeah, it's very important for our identity, and this language was passed from generation to generation, and despite the fact that the language is not the home language, I want my child to have the knowledge, the basic knowledge of the language. But there are some parents who are saying, yeah, they're just saying, okay, if the language is taught, then my child can go there. So there are different approaches and attitudes. And when it comes to the language, I'm not sure that I understood correctly the question, but I can say that in Russia, the languages, they do have different status, indigenous languages, and it also depends on the community. So in the big groups of indigenous communities, and also in the areas that are normally very rich when it comes to the resources, the languages, they have quite a substantial legal recognition. So there are language laws where it's quite clearly stated what kind of rights within the school context, within the context of communication in authorities, indigenous languages have. So we do have such experiences. But when it comes to the Sámi language, I wouldn't say that it's only cultural one. It is recognized as a language, even though some people claim that there's no normativity. The other thing that it does not have the legal basis. It does not. In the Lovozero and in Murmansk region, there's no law on the Sámi language. And I was thinking that it's also one of the perspectives that I'm analyzing. Okay, will it help us really to have the law on the language in analogy to other subjects of the federation? And would it really help to leave the status of the language for the people living in Murmansk Oblast, or it will not be helpful at all? And in in Murmansk Oblast, considering the fact that they're following the federal legislation on the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation, but they don't have their own law on the Sámi language. There's no obligation, for example, of Sámi being an official language in the as a language of communication and so on and so forth. But maybe I'm not sure I answered.
No. Yes, you answered. Yeah. I was just wondering if there are ongoing discussions, not in the legal context
with the language. There are discussions with the language status, like, you know, but there are more discussions with making it in a way normative. So that's what I hear all the time. There are problems with the fact that a lot of people say that the language was not developed like from the 70s, for example. There are no officially recognized dictionaries. So there was some work being done by some researchers, but then other ones are opposing that, okay, this is not a proper dictionary and these educational materials are not proper because this alphabet is not correct one. So there are more discussions within the community regarding such issues than recognition of the language itself.
This is a really fascinating topic. I have, I guess, one question concerns kind of these, like you touched upon the silences in the questions that you would pose during the interviews, and perhaps also silences on topics from the interviewees. And I think that perhaps ties into the whole discussion about the legacy of colonialism and imperialism, and the kind of like how you deal with things that are perhaps unsaid, or things that have become more, you know, embedded into structural issues, so it becomes perhaps less visible in certain senses. So yeah, I wanted to just hear about your reflection on if you encountered like these kind of silences, or what you interpret as in silence, and also I wanted to ask a little bit about, you mentioned in the beginning an aim to do some kind of education, like your contribution to the community could be in this sense of education. Was that something that you're still considering, although now you're in a difficult position to do so, or has your understanding of the problems changed so that you don't necessarily feel that education is actually what that's what they need?
I think it's very relevant question on the in general reflexivity and challenges that I was faced with, because it's a very complex topic, and I'm outside. Of course, I'm Russian, and the Sámi communities I was working with, they're also Russian, but I'm also not Sámi person, and of course it took a lot of time to develop the relations of trust. Basically, it was very important to inform and what you are doing, why you are doing, how you are going to do this, and whom are you going to inform about your research, and that you're not going to report anything. But of course, there were some issues that that were not that easy to touch upon, and that I could not approach as good as other topics. So my original plan was to meet officials, a lot of officials. And for now, I think that I'm okay with what I have, because I've got the most relevant persons. But those ones I talked to, I could feel that it was very important for them that I'm very careful with the information I got from them, because the everything that is stated officially, it's not always how it is exercised in practice. So the issues that were shared with me regarding the political processes of taking some kind of decisions when it comes to the languages of the communities, some of the aspects, they will not be in my dissertation. And also some topics I could not discuss because those persons I wanted to discuss the information, mostly it's officials, they did not reply, which is of course maybe very typical. Also in Sweden, I don't know, but I had a feeling that it was intentional that I was ignored. In some situations, some officials, they actually met me in person after the call of other persons that I knew. But of course, they were borders on the processes of taking decisions. So this was kind of the topic. Also, I felt that it's very sensitive topic for many Sámi community members regarding the research being done, that a lot of researchers, they were coming and they were not given back, they were not returning, and they were not sharing the information they decided to put into their texts. And I'm feeling now that I'm in the situation when I wanted to go personally to them before the publication is there to share this with them, and it's so much challenged that I'm very much afraid that I want to communicate everything in the best possible way, but it's not that every person that I contacted is checking emails. So some of them I approached, but some of them I need to share the data with them before I get it published. Yeah, so the researcher participant issues, they were very sensitive as well. For some people who are not included into this list, but that I met during my first field trip, when I wanted to get the information, general information about the community, the colonial stories were difficult to discuss. And when it comes to the contribution, I still would love to do as much as I can. And I think that the legal awareness about the rights that indigenous communities have when it comes to the languages, it's very important because they, as I said, they were not aware of what they're eligible for. But also I hope that it will be possible for me to participate in this educational issues that I wanted to take part in. And as I said, even though if I have no opportunity to do this now, I hope that it will be possible later, because I saw it as the main contribution to be meaningful for them, so that I'm not just a reference for some other persons in, I don't know, 10, 20 years doing research on Sámi communities and use me as a source. I did not want my research to be just a reference. But it's very challenging now in all the aspects. Because as I said, also my background is making me feel that I cannot be not engaged with the issues that are happening. So, but I hope that it will be possible to, that it will be later taken the decision that it's possible to participate openly in the projects. Of course, now I discussed the issues with And in our university, there are guidelines that you still can participate in cooperation with the Russian institutions, but there are such restrictions like the financing of the project and other aspects that it's to be on a safe side, first of all, for them, it's better not to cooperate now. Because I think that for me, of course, it's important that I'm following all the guidelines from the university, but it's very important for them that they are not damaged in any way by getting any kind of support and help.
Yeah, those are really difficult
Yes.
ethical considerations and things to negotiate under these difficult circumstances.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are like we have been discussing so much like ourselves like these issues with the ethical review process, like on paper, and then ethics in real life in a sense. But when it but in your case, it becomes really even more challenging to figure out like what is. But hopefully, you can at a later point return to the site and talk to people.
I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I have a question. But I'm thinking of this. Oh, thank you. I don't know if you have mentioned it, but how come that you have been focusing with your background on the Sámi people and Sámi language? Why? I also know that you have a connection. You were born in Arkhangelsk, but you have another link with Ukraine.
And then I ended up with Sámi. I think that it was the idea of developing the project within the Sámi issues was for quite some time. Because before I started with my project, I also met the representatives of the Sámi community, and I discussed with them, what could be nice to do, what could be helpful as from me as a researcher with this background to do so. This was inspired by the members of the community, first of all, that I knew before the project started. And then I thought it will be especially interesting if I conduct comparative studies on Sweden, because I'm in Sweden now, and on Russia. But now, since the project is already it's so big, the Russian one, I hope that maybe the next stage of my research could be done, as we discussed with you earlier, as comparative study on, for example, Sweden and Russia, and then for the Russian communities that could be beneficial to get the knowledge of other experiences with the Sámi language teaching, for example, in Russia. So that's how the ideas were developed in a way.
But why Sámi language? Why Sámi culture? Why did you pick that one?
The Sámi themselves, because I knew the situation before I got the position and before I traveled to the Lovozero itself, from those communities that I worked with. And also, as I said before, I worked with a very big community, indigenous community in Nenets. That is the biggest indigenous community in Russia, and I was getting aware of the situation with the Sámi languages in Russia. I knew that it's completely different context and it's completely different perspective. So for me, myself, it was very, very exciting to explore the situation with the completely different social setting. But also, as I said, like getting more knowledge, studying, and in no way you get also more perspectives on the Sámi issues, and of course you see that the information regarding the amount of the information regarding the Finnish part, Swedish part, Norwegian part is much higher than about Russia, because of the different reasons, because of these political issues, language issues. So there's a gap that I also felt that it is in place. And for me, it was, as I said, interesting. And I felt like I originally thought maybe it will be hard for me to approach the Sámi community when I go there, because I was not sure that everyone speaks their Russian. I thought that there are some Sámi language speakers. Of course, those one I met before, they were fluent in Russian. But that was not the case, of course, when I went to the Sámi community. And even those ones who are representatives of the older generation, they could share the knowledge with me in Russian. So there are multiple factors, basically.
Thank you.
I have one question. What would you say is the most interesting and or unexpected result so far?
I think that it's very hard for me to say what is the most interesting. But I think that after conducting these field trips and having an idea in mind that I really want to switch from the legal perspective to social legal perspective, I think you can see that in my actions and with me changing the project, maybe not the unexpected, but I don't know, maybe more inspiring experience was that the existence of this social setting that defines the right and these multiple aspects that affects the effectuation, they really made me feel that I need to change the whole field. So I think that these trips in general, the experience of meeting the people, listening to their stories, and seeing that, you know, behind every person there's own story, it impacted my approach to the project and my my view on the field where this project should be located. But I think it's very hard for me to say that there's only this idea in the interviews that I think everything that they say is really, very touching, I think. And that's, I could never approach only by analyzing the legal norms.
Talking like a sociologist of law.
Yeah, it's. I'm very happy to be here. As I say, I'm to either the first one and then to you also, that I'm not trained within the field of sociology of law, but having an experience of working with the communities and doing the research with them, I felt that only having the legal perspective, it's not really enough to understand the context and the real picture of the right itself in the real life of the people. So it's, I think it's for me, it's very interesting project. I don't know. I hope that,
Yes. No more questions? No? Thank you very much.
Yeah.